How do we have a better relationship with time? Because I still want to be impactful, effective, efficient, and all those kind of things.
I need to do less better, more effectively.
And that's helped me even increase my rates, which is a weird kind of connection. But it's like, if I'm going to take a project, that's actually costing time with my family, and once that connection got made in my mind, it gave me more confidence to say, this is my price. I'm sorry if it doesn't work out, but if I'm going to lower that, it's my family that's paying. Welcome to the inaugural The Way of Kings podcast. I'm Josh Monin. This is my friend, Joshua Lee Henry, and we are doing a new thing here.
It's exciting. It's new. It's different. It's, I feel like a little unknown for us. But one of the things when we talk about the way of kings, you and I say this to each other all the time. It's this idea of thinking, living, and leading the way of a king. And, you and I both, it's not a secret. We're both followers of Jesus, the true king. And I think that as we have these conversations around leadership and entrepreneurship and freelancing, we just really felt like the Lord told us to maybe record this as a blessing and as a ministry and a value for others. We think that this is something that's going to be valuable to you. And so, Josh, I'm excited. We are officially recording live the first podcast for The Way of Kings. Thank you, my brother, for helping me make this happen.
The vision for this is to serve people who are kingdom minded and who are in business, to whatever degree that is. You could be a freelancer, a solopreneur, an entrepreneur, the big business, small business owner, but basically you're not depending on someone else for your paycheck, right? So we're in a different world because we're entrepreneurs. And we also are followers of Christ, like you said. And so how do we follow God's ways? I think of that verse in, Isaiah, where it's, God saying like, my ways are higher than your ways. My thoughts are higher than your thoughts. And I don't think he's saying that just to say, hey, I'm better than you and I have better way. Yeah, I think it's an invitation to, have a different way of living, and how does that translate into business? And we just have had some great conversations, you and I, about this. And we're like, wow, there's something here, and we just want to kind of be obedient and pursue that. And so I'm excited, as to think through and discover, there's that verse in Proverbs 2 that says, it's the glory of God to, conceal a matter and the glory of kings to search out a matter. And I feel like that's what we're even doing with this. Like we're searching out like the way of kings, of being a business person, an entrepreneur in this day and age, and also following the Lord and seeking his kingdom first.
I love that too, man, because, it's, we talk about this a lot in some regard that, God's ways are not the ways of this world. And so already we are set apart. But even when you look at things in the physical, and in this world, freelancing, being a solopreneur, being an entrepreneur, being a business owner, it is so not the norm already. And so we're like double out of the majority because, believers and followers of Jesus, plus also then being business owners and freelancers. And so I have found that place can be lonely. And that's why I've enjoyed our relationship and have benefited so much from this. And so, with the Way of Kings, we want to provide that community to others that maybe are looking for that brotherhood, that are looking for that community, that knighthood, to be a part of something that is meaningful. And, speaking about the Way of Kings and that otherworldly concept, heavenly concept, let's talk about time, because you're exactly right. And today's topic on time management and using time and all things time, you've got some interesting perspective on this. I know we're going to share some of our stories on how we view time.
One of the things God's challenged me in is having a better relationship with time, so like in my morning devotions, sometimes I just take a little bit to be quiet and listen and kind of jot down in my journal what I feel like God's saying. And over, I just felt like this idea of like time, and specifically like how I relate to time, because like a lot of, entrepreneurs, freelancers, I feel like I just always have way more things I need to do than there's time in the day. And it can be overwhelming and, it can be stressful and things like that. And I feel like I've been making some progress with some of these different things that I've been exploring, and just really starting with like, how do we yeah, have a better relationship with time, because I still want to be impactful, effective, efficient, and all those kind of things. But I want to do it in a place of like out of peace and joy, and where I'm not feeling like I'm just too busy. I can't even think, and I don't have time to, talk to my kids or anything. And so yeah, I just been kind of exploring that for us, like for our family, even it's been affecting different things. Like I started to really take like the Sabbath more seriously. So like that was just within the last 2 or 3 months. And so I've always not worked on Sundays, but it was always like a day for just not working. It was not really a day I honestly looked forward to, because I was like, well, go to church, don't work, watch some football, go Seahawks. But it didn't have this like, there wasn't a lot of joy to it. And now like, it's my favorite day of the week, I can just honestly say. And so just like, even that, like really getting back to like honoring the Sabbath, and we do some fun rituals around that of, Saturday night we light the candles and we say some blessings, and the kids have loved it. Lacey, my wife, is really enjoying it. And even when we have guests over, they've been saying it's like, wow, that was a really special experience, and just sets the tone for that whole rest of the day. And yeah, it feels like a vacation almost like every week. And it's been awesome. And that has like affected the rest of the week too. The reason I'm even talking about that is like, well, what does that have to do with time management and work and everything? I feel like it has a lot to do with it, because now I'm like, I have a standard of like peace and rest. And I'm reminded of that once a week. And then throughout the week, if I'm getting away from that, I'm like, okay, well, I'm deviating now. I'm not in that restful place, and I'm getting back into striving and things like that. So I'm trying to stay in that place of rest and peace and not worry, and still get all the important things done on my to-do list.
I love that, man. I don't know about you, but for me, as a entrepreneur, as a personality type, I joke with my wife, I don't feel like I'm normal unless I'm busy. I always have multiple plates spinning. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs are like that. It's that entrepreneurial ADD where, it's like the saying, if you want to get something done, ask a busy person. Like, I just don't like idle hands. I don't have idle time, and so I feel like I'm constantly doing something. I want to talk on that in a moment, but I want to get back to what you said, because there's something interesting. Now, I used to be this is not theology class, everybody. So this is not seminary class. I did spend some time in ministry though. And one of the things that I learned very early on in ministry, public ministry, we're all called to ministry, by the way. I'll just throw that out there right now. I think you and I both run our businesses as ministry. But one of the things I learned in my ministry training, seminary training, was that in the Jewish tradition, and I'm not Jewish, but in the New Testament Jewish tradition, the Sabbath actually begins on Saturday evening and starts the week. Yet in our Western calendar, we think the weekend is the week's end. And so we have it in our Western thought to where the weekend is made from resting from work. The work that we do Monday through Friday, we rest on the weekend, Saturday and Sunday, when in reality, the lifestyle that Jesus modeled in the New Testament was working from rest. He rested first on the Sabbath. And from that rest of filling up his emotional, spiritual intimacy with the Father, that emotional gas tank, if you will, that's what he ministered out of throughout the rest of the week. We have it flipped, in our Western society so much of the time, where we work all week and then we rest on the weekend. In reality, that resting time is supposed to fill us up and energize us for the work to come. The future to come, there's a guy I follow quite a bit. I used to do a lot of ministry with. His name is Mike Brain. We'll probably talk about him later on in depth, but he has a series of what he calls life shapes. And one of those life shapes, the very first life shape, is the circle. These are 9 geometric shapes, and the first one is the circle. And it's this principle of Kairos moments, which we're going to get into in a moment as well. And Kairos moments are really understanding that we work from a restful place of intimacy with the Father, and anything that we do in life and in ministry and in business needs to come from that and flow out of that. And so what you just brought up, Josh, we've never talked about that before, but this idea of Sabbath and how that's not like the letdown from the week, that really should be the build up into the week to come.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's interesting. I wasn't expecting that when I feel like this invitation from the Lord when he's like, "Hey, why don't you have, I want to speak to you about time." I'm thinking, okay, what's the new time management technique? I love, David Allen getting things done and all this kind of stuff. Stephen Covey, it's great and it's all good. But so I was expecting, maybe something like that. But, starting with the Sabbath is like, oh, okay, I guess this does seem like the Lord, it's like really getting to the heart of the matter, and just having a different posture with how we approach life. And really that's, I think, part of the way of kings, what we're talking about. There's a way to do life. There's a way to do business. And you can have a quality of life, even in the getting things done and hitting goals. And yeah, we want to grow our businesses and we're unapologetic about it. That's great. That's what we're called to do. We're called to be profitable and solve problems. And there's lots of stuff to do, but yeah, doing it from a place of rest is just, it's way more effective too, because you think better. I realize, you can come up with better creative ideas when you're not in that stress mode. So yeah, that's been exciting, just the Sabbath. And then, even on learning to incorporate that even into the day-to-day stuff, like what does that look like practically for me too, like taking more breaks. It sounds very simple, but something I learned years ago, even writing copy. And maybe I'd like to hear your process. We never really talk a lot about our personal processes of writing copy and things like that. But I remember when I think it was when I first discovered this, it was Eugene Schwartz. I heard, him talking about his little timer method. He set a timer for 33 minutes and 33 seconds, and he'd write and work, and then it would buzz. And for 5 minutes, he'd go take a break and play with the dog or something. And then he'd come back. And so I started, experimenting with that, taking these little micro breaks. And now I found my sweet spot personally is I work for 50 minutes. I take a 10-minute break, another 50-minute focus session, 10-minute break. And I can usually have enough mental stamina to do maybe like 3 or 4 of those really intense in the mornings. And I can get a lot done with that kind of, rhythm. But the break part is very much necessary, because I know when I've violated that principle, I can't, it's not as good as taking that break, once an hour, getting up. And I have a dartboard in here, so I'll throw darts, or I'll go out and say hi to the kids, or, walk around, do something, just try to get my mind off it, but then come in and sit back down and work again. And I think even that is like part of that principle of just this rhythm of work, rest, you zoom out, you have it at the week level, 1 day a week, but even like within an hour, you could do that. It's like, okay, it's 50 minutes and then 10 minutes of rest. And it's like, oh, this works better, So yeah, it's just interesting seeing these principles, how they play out throughout.
You just said something, dude. And I gotta get me a dartboard. I used to have a dartboard a long time ago, and I love playing darts. I need a dartboard out in my office. You just said something, man, that like, God just dropped this in my heart right now. So much of life is about rhythm, cycles, seasons. We've got daylight savings coming up, as we record this weekend. And you said that giving that room for rest and creativity to flow from your unconscious during those breaks in the day. The thing that I thought of, and I got this vision, is like a person breathing. And inspiration literally means like the breath of God breathing in, that inspiration of creative, inhaling. And it's almost like with work and rest, when we inhale, it's like we're doing work. That's like the work of our bodies to inhale. And then when we exhale, it's like that rest, you know what I mean? So it's like this constant flow, and that's how creative inspiration hits. People talk about eureka moments, having a breath of fresh air, having that new creative idea in the shower or whatever it might be. But I also find, I believe God can talk to us at any point. If he can talk through, Balaam's donkey, he can talk to us at any point in the day. But I do think that sometimes we get too busy to where we don't allow the opportunity to hear God's voice. He might be trying to get our attention and we just ignore him because we have too much going on. And so I think the other thing, that having those time out moments, those breaks in the day, whether or not you're doing anything quote unquote spiritual, just throwing the darts to the dartboard, you allow that room to hear from God. And I think that's where some of those Kairos moments can really happen. And so what Kairos means, what that looks like in some significant Kairos moments, maybe you've experienced in your business, and how that really relates to time in this conversation here.
That's good. Yeah. Because a lot of our listeners probably know there's difference between, Kairos and Chronos time, and in the Bible, and Chronos being where we have the term, chronological order, and just how we think about there's so many minutes in a day and all that sort of stuff. And then the Kairos moments, it's like, it's time for this, it's like, this is the right opportune time, and really wanting to avail ourselves and open up ourselves to like having more of those moments, because it's amazing. Yeah. What God can do when he breaks through and suddenly something happens that would have took us weeks or months or years on our own trying to just, strive after something, but God can do a lot of times in a moment, and so just being, aware of that, allowing for those things to happen. And then even like, I also think too about like big decisions in life, I feel like those are Kairos moments a lot of times, it's like, okay, it's time to do something. Like we moved down to Texas, about 2 years ago. January will be our 2-year mark. But a couple of years ago, we felt like it was time to make a move, and it was a timing thing, it was like, we just felt like our kids were a certain age. We were either going to put deeper roots down in Washington State where we were living, or we were going to make a move. And before the kids got older, and there was I would say like a Kairos moment in our family. We're like, we need to just really take this seriously. So we started praying every morning together, me and my wife, and just putting it before the Lord. Like, is this really you, Lord? Is like, what's going on? We feel stirred up to move and launch out somewhere else. And it was confirmed. And we really felt like, yeah, this is the time to make the move. And now we're down here in Texas, and that's a whole other story. But I just think of things like that change kind of the trajectory of your life, and even from, think about when I quit the corporate job, 12 years ago, because I felt like it's time to do my own thing, like I'm not meant to have this kind of job, nothing wrong with that if that's what you're meant for. But for me, it was not a good fit to just, have a corporate sales job and have a safe, secure paycheck. And, this is life, and work here for 30 years and then you're going to retire. And that's not life. And I just felt there was a time like, okay, it was the right time to do it, even though I didn't have all these clients lined up and didn't feel like, on the outside, it didn't look like the right time, but I knew there was a window of time to just to launch out.
What you described, kind of that point of decision, that point of opportune, moment, that point of action, you know what I mean? Like where everything after that is part of a new chapter, right? Like moving to Texas, you've got your life and your family pre-Texas, you've got life post-Texas. We've got life before Christ. We have life after Christ. We have life before becoming a freelancer, life after becoming a freelancer. And so for a business owner, entrepreneur, whatever the case is, point of life before marriage and after, before your kids and after. So there's always like a marking, a change that takes place, almost like a metamorphosis, if you will, where you go from one state into another state. You know what I'm saying? A state of being, a state of living. And I feel like when I go through and sometimes I geek out on words as a copywriter, I geek out on these words. And it's interesting because I was doing I told you about this, a word study on that Kairos. Kairos and Chronos are both Greek words in the New Testament. They're 2 of the 4 words that Jesus used to describe time. Chronos is that chronological order. Kairos is this opportune time, this decision point. And it's amazing because in Mark, when Jesus is talking, he says, repent, for the kingdom of God is at hand. And when he says at hand, what that means is it's a time, it's a sentence in relation to time, that it is so close that you can reach out and touch it. That God's kingdom is here, and God's kingdom is where the king is. So when Jesus is saying that now is the time to repent, it's because you are in the presence of the king. And there's an action where you will leave this encounter different from the way you were before. You get married, you have your kid, you buy your first home, you start your business. Like there's that changing, like I will never be before that. I will never be who I was before this time again. You know what I mean? Those Kairos moments. And they can be big. Those are big examples, of course, obviously coming to know the Lord, getting married. Those are big examples, but they're also small things, times where maybe you've had this. I've had moments, Josh, where I knew this was the last conversation I'm going to have with this person ever again. I've had Kairos moments where I think I want something. Maybe there's a house that we wanted to buy. We, drive by it. We look at it. We want that house. We want that house. We want that house. We drive by it one night and God says, that's not the house you're going to buy. I've had these moments, and it's like those, you look back and you think, well, how big was that? How much did that determine, my future and things? But it's like, it's really allowing God to shape and direct that path for you, but you have to be attuned. I think of all, I mentioned this to you earlier in the week. I think of all of the times Jesus was on a path. He was on a mission. The disciples were trying to take him to another city. He was healing people, all this. And the number of times that he's interrupted. If I'm writing copy and somebody interrupts me, I get ticked off. I get annoyed. I get angry. We lose that flow state. And I think that flow state is an important part of creativity and productivity. But I do think that one of the enemy's greatest, tricks and weapons against, kingdom-minded leaders like us and others, those that are listening to us right now, is that, he will not allow us to be interrupted by God's work. Sometimes he tries to interrupt us because we're doing God's work. Other times he doesn't want us to be, quote unquote, distracted with God's work. Those interruptions that Jesus had. Think of the woman with the bleeding, and Jesus says, who touched me?
Oh yeah. That's so good. I was just thinking about something one of my first pastors told me, the first pastor I ever had after I got saved. And I came out of a life of, drug addiction and alcoholism and all this kind of stuff. And God radically saved me in my early 20s. But I remember I was meeting with my pastor, and he's like, if the devil can't get you to say no to the call of God, he'll try to get you to say yes to everything, like sometimes in the name of the call of God. And I'm like, oh, it was like, but it hit me because he was giving me counsel because he saw, I think, how busy I was, even with ministry stuff. And you can be busy with, just even good things too. It's not always bad things. It's not like, oh, I'm distracted by all these terrible things. It's like, no, it could even be the good things of work and ministry and stuff like that. But if it's getting in the way of, like you're saying, like there's some divine appointment that the Father has, like Jesus was, he had very important things he was doing, but he's in a crowd and someone touches them, or, they're on their way somewhere, like you're saying, and something else happens on the way to something that is important, but he had time for that. And busyness is not from the devil. It is the devil. Carl Jung said that, it's just like, yeah, the being too busy, it's I don't feel like that's the way of kings, so I'm like, I want to be a good steward of time and not waste it. That's on like one end of the spectrum, but I don't want to be so rigid and busy that I'm missing the things that God's dropping right in our laps,
getting too many clients, having too many projects, too many offers, requests for proposals. So many opportunities that just come flooding your way, and having that discernment to say no to things, especially for me, just being honest, like I grew up lower middle class, and I'm making more money now in my mid 30s than I ever saw, my parents have, at 2 and 3 times as much, And so when I started my own business, we were in such a low place financially and with stress and burdens and health issues that like I said yes to every project I could sell and every project that came my way because, I was, for fear of not having enough money and not having enough work and, make hay while the sun's out and all this kind of stuff. But then you get to a point to where it's like, I'm doing too much. I need to do less. I need to do less better, more effectively. And that could be hard because you have to rebuke that fear of poverty. You have to, rebuke that fear of lack because that's not the king's way. In fact, the king's way is a way of abundance. We have these 5 A's that we can unpack as we have more calls. One of those is this idea of abundance. I think abundance is, defined not only as time, but in relationship, and also money, and, those 3 areas at a minimum. But time affects so much of that, it's the greatest resource, more valuable than money.
I feel like one of these kind of Kairos times I had years ago that was pivotal for my business was when I started saying no more, no more often, because I used to work with, I don't know, probably like 5, 6, sometimes 7, different clients or projects in a month, like different ones. And my mind was so fractured and scattered, and I was not even operating at my best, for the work that I was doing, just trying to keep up with all these different things. And then I went to a model where I'd work with maybe one or two clients a month, maybe take on a little side project here or there in addition, but the effectiveness, the results just skyrocketed. I was getting way better results for my clients. I was making more money. I had more sanity in my life and peace, working with fewer clients, but playing a bigger role. And started having these retainers and things. And that really, caused me to go on a whole different path in my, my freelance business. But I had to, I had to get to the point where I had to say no to things. People come say, hey, will you write these few emails? Will you do this? And like, no, I just don't have the bandwidth. It was not always easy to turn those kind of projects down. So that's a really good point.
I was talking to somebody today, a leader in the financial publishing space where I write. He was talking about the quote from Craig Groeschel, pastor of Life Church, that every time you say yes to something, you say no to something else. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people have said things similar to that, but it's true. And I have found, when I had all those little projects, I could say, yes to those. But if I said no to those, that gave me room to say yes to something bigger. I would rather work on one big project and do it with all my, energy and focus and creative ability than to have 17 little projects that all distract and divert attention. When you have that big focus, you're allowed to let that momentum build, But I mean, you're so right, man. Like, because not late night all-nighters, where I work until 5 a.m., 6 a.m., where I've got a deadline. And, you're ministering to me right now because I need to do a better job of treating my time like with my family as if it were a deadline. I mean, maybe you've had this experience, but I've had promos where it's like, I've got to get this done by 8 a.m. tomorrow. It's going to legal. Do I operate with that same kind of urgency, spending time with my family, or Sabbath, or having that intimacy with the Lord? Do I have that same kind of deadline and urgency to get my Bible time in every morning? You know what I mean? Like, some days I don't, some days I don't.
But I've realized, like, you got to fight for it, like especially I feel like the more responsibilities you have in life, it's like as the kids get older, as the business grows, we want to stay healthy physically, all these different things. There's different opportunities in ministry, and it's like these important relationships. You got to fight for them, So that's like date night. I was just like, we fight for that every Friday night. We're just like, there's all these other things we could do. We could say no to it, but every Friday night, Lacey and I go and have date night, and that's part of just saying, this is set aside time. And on most Wednesday nights, I do quality time with the kids. But again, just have to fight for it. I don't always have the energy because I'm like, man, sometimes I'm like, well, I don't have any more mental bandwidth, emotional bandwidth. I just want to just kind of maybe zone out or something after work. Like, no, this is something that's worth fighting for. Sure enough, when I go do it and we go out to eat or something with the kids, I just, I get renewed sense of energy and joy and everything, but it's just fighting for these things as life gets busy. So I like what you said too. It's like when we say yes to something, we're saying no to something else, And that's helped me even like increase my rates, which is a weird kind of connection, but it's like, if I'm going to take a project and if I'm going to charge less than what I'm worth, that's actually costing time with my family, and once that connection got made in my mind, it gave me more confidence to say, this is my price. I'm sorry if it doesn't work out, but if I'm going to lower that, it's my family that's paying because I'm going to have to take on more work. I'm going to have to put in more hours. And so, it all comes, full circle.
When you really understand, the cost to other meaningful things, family and faith included, it really puts things into perspective. Well, why don't we talk for a few minutes about practical things that you do in your business, to get everything done, man. I mean, you're a busy guy, got lots of little kids, beautiful family. Like, how do you manage your time?
Yeah, I can share a few things and love to hear the same from you too. I'm curious. So some like practical ways for me, like every week, I do I guess maybe I can start at the quarter. So I like to do a quarterly plan, every quarter, just to take some time. I've gotten away from it since we moved to Texas. I want to get back into this, but I got to the point where I was taking like an overnight trip by myself, which sounds a little selfish, and maybe it is in some respects, but it gave me the time and the place to really go deep and think about the next 90 days. And so I would just rent an Airbnb somewhere kind of close by and would go out there, take some books, my journals, my notes, whatever I need. And I would just take a day and a half. Usually I pick somewhere I could go hiking or something like that, and set my intentions and my goals and the vision, and have some time of prayer, and really map out what that next 90 days looks like. One of the fun places I went to is a tree house actually in Washington that overlooked this like cool waterfall and everything. I found it on Airbnb and went out there. And unfortunately, there was a windstorm that night, and the treehouse, I feel like I almost blew out of the tree. And I was like, am I going to die? This is crazy. But yeah, so like 90-day plans, you don't have to be in a treehouse blowing off the side of a cliff, but you can just, even taking some time going to a coffee shop for, a few hours, or going somewhere out, maybe outside your normal environment, has been really helpful. And having some sort of structure or questions that, I ask myself, and I can share some of these links, and I think we'll give away a helpful resource here at the end, and I'll try to link to some of these things if people want some templates. But yeah, the 90-day plan, and then having a weekly plan has helped me. And what helps me with that is the way that I start that. I just open a plain text document. I used to do all the fancy journals and systems and softwares and stuff, but I found just a plain text document. I use Byword because I just like the interface. It's all clean and everything. I start with a vision. I just say, okay, like a lot of times I'll do this on Saturdays, maybe Saturday morning or Friday afternoon, but I'll think about the coming week, and I'll write it like it's already there, so I'll say, say I'm doing it on Saturday, like tomorrow's going to be Saturday. So I'll do this tomorrow, and I'll write it, and I'll say, okay, it's Saturday, the following Saturday at 3 p.m. I'm sitting here at my favorite coffee shop, and it was a great week. And I'm feeling good with my progress because this happened. And I kind of just let it unfold from there. And so I feel like that's a way I'm learning to kind of partner with the Lord and use, just my own mind of like planning things. And so it feels like a good place, because I'm like, okay, well, what would I actually be happy with like this week? And so I'm like, okay, like I'm not going to get everything in life done in a week, so just realizing I'm going to make a certain amount of progress this week. What would need to happen for me to be happy with it? And like, kind of like the Dan Sullivan question, if we were talking 3 years from now, what would happen, but just applied for the next week. Like, okay, well, this, write it out in that kind of story vision form. This just only takes a few minutes, to do. And then I look at that and I'm like, okay, what are the 3 big rocks of the week? And usually there's 3 things in there. Say, okay, then those are my 3 goals. And I write that at the top. These are my 3 weekly goals. And then I just kind of let that guide. If I'm really on top of it, I'll sketch out like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, kind of like summarize what I want to get done those days. A lot of times I don't get to that, and I'll just kind of do that the day before each day. But I'll have that weekly vision outline, so it'll guide me. So then when it's, Tuesday, at the end of the day, Tuesday, and I'm thinking about Wednesday, I'm like, well, what am I doing tomorrow? I go back to that and say, okay, oh yeah, these are my 3 rocks. This is the vision. This is where I am at the progress. And then I'll just map out the plan for the next day in that plain text document. And I set my 3 goals for the day there too. And yeah, it does always go perfect. No, it's like I get off course and track, and sometimes I'm hitting those goals, sometimes I'm not, but at least it gives me something to aim for. And I guess the last thing I'll say on that is I also try to end the day with 3 wins, and just say, okay, to close out the day, what were the 3 wins, so I can feel good about that. And I'm taking that more seriously, like celebrating the wins. Naturally, I don't do that. I'm always thinking about the next thing. Like, okay, good, that's checked off the list. Moving on to the next thing. Before I would never take any time to pause and say, hey, that was good.
That's really helpful, man. I love that Dan Sullivan question. If 3 to 5 years, from now, what would have to happen in order for this to be a success? It'd be a home run, a grand slam. What would have to have happened? And it's good because it allows. And I like your, if I understood you right, you write it as if it's like past tense, right? So like you're like future. So like all of the literature I've ever read on goal setting is to write stuff like in present or past tense. Like I have lost 50 pounds, right? I have, lifted 5 times this week, or whatever the case is. And so it like reinforces, I don't know, something with your subconscious or something like that, but it is helpful. I think I do something kind of similar in terms of the big rock piece, that comes from Stephen Covey. And Every week I've got the big rocks, the big things I have to get done. That's usually a combination of stuff that's personal for the family, stuff that's business related, and then the different ventures that I'm a part of. I might have a client work thing, I might have a podcast thing, I might have, a teaching that I'm doing, and maybe some promo, that I've got a deadline for or whatever. And then banks and other, just errand type stuff for the family that has to get done, And so what I do is I map those big rocks out first on my calendar, and then I fill in everything else in the surrounding time based on energy management. Like I do a lot of my calls in the afternoons. Morning time is meant for creativity. So writing and also having that intimacy with the Lord. And so that's when I do my Bible time. That's when I do the majority of my best writing happens from 8 to 11 in the morning and or 8 to 11 at night. Once the kids are in bed and I've got those first couple of hours before midnight to bang out any extra copy I need, that's when I'm most creative and most productive from an idea generation standpoint. But from there, once I have my big rocks on the calendar and I begin filling things in with the pebbles, the small stuff, what I do every day is I'm old school. So you've got your plain text document. I have a legal pad, yellow legal pads. I go through dozens of them, in a couple of months. And I just move stuff over from day to day, and I outline it between personal stuff, business stuff, client stuff, and then, passion projects that I have going on. And I list those big rocks at the top, and then I start filling in the pebbles. And I know I indicate sometimes with, numbers, Roman numerals and letters, priority and subsets, just like you would on an outline. And I rank them, and I rank them by important, urgent, things that have an action or a decision that needs to be made, and then things that could wait, things for now or things that can wait till later. So everything is either important or urgent, an action or a decision, now or later. And I ask myself, and so if it's like not important, not urgent, well, it's not on my list. It's a non-issue. If it's important, not urgent, decision, but it can wait till later, not on the list. You know what I'm saying? And I just move everything from day to day and week to week. And I just cross things off. And you're right. I've been celebrating the wins at the end of each day. I look back. Did I get the big rocks done? If I didn't get the big rocks done, what happened? What interruption? If it was, a bad interruption that took me away from work, not a good interruption like we talked about earlier, how did that happen? Why did I allow that to happen? Did I have to tackle something more important? I think of Henry Cloud and his classic book, Boundaries. You get what you create and allow. So did I not get my goals done because I created a diversion that I allowed to distract myself? Or was it somebody else's priorities that I allowed to be enforced on my agenda? What was the reason I didn't get this done? And that has been good because this created personal accountability for me to make the most use of my time, to steward my time wisely. And it also keeps me on track with my goals. And then I do other things like throughout the night, in the middle of the night, or when I'm, having dinner, if I think of something, I will voice text it to myself. And if it's really important, then I will email it to myself. I think that's like a typical copywriter hack. I think every copywriter I know sends themselves emails,
Yep.
things to do the next day.
I'm guilty of that too.
I started using a whiteboard for annual plans, and that's been good. But I found because it's good to have annual stuff in front of me, but I'm not writing new things on that board all the time. You know what I mean? So it's kind of more just to have that big goal for the year, 2 or 3 big goals for the year. And when I'm really in crunch mode, and if I do have a lot of plates spinning and I need to keep myself in order, that's when I go to my 3x5 note cards. And that's when I take the 2 or 3 most important things from all the different legal pads, because I have legal pads for each client or project. And so every project is split up into a folder system and a legal pad system. So I can just grab legal pad to legal pad when I'm jumping on different calls. But when I'm really in a crunch time, if, in the days when my wife and I were pregnant, if it was in that 3rd trimester and baby was coming, or when I've got a promo launching and I'm in the middle of final legal review, I'll break out the note cards. And now I'm only putting a couple things on here and nothing else matters. And I basically go AWOL, absent without leave on some other things, because at that point, I become, a monomaniac on a mission, one mission that I'm trying to get done in a certain time frame, and nothing else matters. Everything else is subservient to that.
That's so good. I can just see you walking around with your 3x5 cords, don't bug me. I'm a man on a mission, a monomaniac on a mission. I love that.
Yeah.
So good. It takes what it takes though. I mean, this, what I'm hearing is that ability to hyper focus when you really need to, and I will say that's a great benefit, I think, from having a career in copywriting that we both, sounds like we've learned, is that the power of a deadline and just, it's got to get done and it's got to happen. And it's got to be good. And it doesn't matter what you're feeling like. It doesn't matter if the muse is playing. It doesn't matter. None of that. It's here. And whatever you got to do to focus. I don't know how it feels like for you, but it feels like a muscle that gets built up, over the years, where it's like you learn to be able to focus at a very deep level, produce something that hopefully is pretty good. And then you got to rest, right? And going back to what we talked about before, it's like, otherwise you'll kind of burn out if you're just trying to do that all the time. But when it calls for it, it's a good skill and a good muscle to have work. So that's so good.
Dan Kennedy calls it clearing the calculator. It's like when you're punching numbers in your calculator, you hit that clear button, everything goes away. It's like a dry erase board. You erase it, or the old Etch-a-Sketch. You shake it up and it all disappears. It's like you have to be able to hyper focus. But when it's done, it's time to rest. It's family time. You hit the clear button, you turn it off. And as hard as it is, because I have a hard time stopping, just being present, being in the moment. We can talk about that maybe on the next episode or something, but the ability to just stop, like, okay, time to stop. And you have to clear that clear that calculator. Otherwise you get burned out.
Yeah. I've been working on that more lately, I've been good with my startup, routines and morning routines, and always kind of, tinkering with those. But the shutdown kind of routine I haven't always been good at, and I've been working on that more, and it's been helpful, to have a more clear cut time to shut down. And for me, that's like writing the 3 wins for the day and doing one last pass in my inbox, so I don't feel like I have to go check it later at night on my phone. Like, okay, there's nothing urgent. It'll be okay for me not to look at this until tomorrow morning. Just telling myself, like, you got permission, get off Slack, get off email, write the 3 wins. And then I like to go for a walk. That's really big for me, is, I walk out and I work on this office on the property. The house is just a, 15-second walk over there. But instead of just going right into the house, I just take a little walk around the neighborhood and just let things just kind of settle down. And then when I go into family time, it's, things are a little bit more shut off. And I found that that's been helpful too.
That's really good. I think, when I used to commute to an office, I had that drive home time to kind of unwind. But yeah, now that I've got my office on the property as well, little actions, the way I turn off my lights, the way I grab my coat, I feel like Mr. Rogers, putting on the cardigan, taking off the cardigan. But like those little actions, I feel like do trigger that activation of like shutdown mode, Speaking of time to shut down, man, this has been about an hour-long conversation, dude. I've loved it. We've covered so much ground here. Just a blessing for me, and a ministry to me. And so I appreciate you sharing so generously with all of your tips and stories and the Kairos moments and things that you've learned, man. You said you had some tips and some resources. Where can listeners and viewers go for that?
Just go to thewayofkings.com. We'll gather all these resources and just give it away for free. So all the different tools and strategies and templates and things that, have benefited us, we're just going to share with the listeners. So yeah, it's thewayofkings.com, and just go there and you'll be able to get those. And you can also get on the email newsletter. We'll be getting updates, and we'll be sharing more about the Way of Kings as we continue to go on this journey.
I appreciate you. Thank you, Josh. I'll talk to you later.
Oh man, that was awesome. That was such a good call. So appreciate it, brother. Thank you.